Hello, thank you all for joining the National Immigration Law Center's webinar. As you know, we feature many speakers talking regularly about top immigration issues. For today, we have several people who are going to talk about issues that affect low-income immigrants across the spectrum. First, we have from NILC, Jackie, who's going to talk about the congressional budget, followed by our special guest, Ben Nduga Kabuye from the Black Alliance for Just Immigration, also talking about budget issues and Baji's Divest campaign. Then we'll have a short Q&A, and that will be followed by Matt from NILC, who's going to talk about health issues, and then Nico from NILC, who's going to present some litigation updates, including several DACA cases that we're working on. We'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions, and if you have questions, please put them into the chat box, and we'll take them as we receive them. And rest assured, we will send you a copy of both the recording and the PowerPoint slides tomorrow. So thank you again for joining us, and I will now pass it over to Jackie.
Great, can you hear me? You can put on the first slide, Ashton, please. There we go. So I want to go back to just do a brief overview around what happened with the 2017 budget a few weeks ago, and also what we're looking forward to for the or dreading for the 2018 fight. Can you add in? Is it there we go? Perfect. So we first of all received in March 2017 Trump's skinny budget. And what that meant is just, it was really kind of a very rough top lines view of what he was going to be proposing for the budget. The budget contained drastic cuts, slashed the EPA by 1/3, the Department of Labor by 21%, HHS by 18%. All of this in order to secure $54 billion increase in Defense Department's funding. Also his $2.6 billion down payment for the border wall, and ultimately to pay for his tax cuts that will require finding other places to trim the budget to pay for. One of the important pieces that came out of that is that, you know, the $2.6 billion that he was initially asking for the border wall is really a down payment, because DHS themselves have internally estimated that the wall itself would cost $21.6 billion over time to pay at the very least. NILC worked with First Focus, CLASP, National Women's Law Center, and Asian Americans Advancing Justice to put out some infographics, including an example of this one, questioning what it would mean to spend this large amount of money on enforcement and on a wall, when instead we could be spending dollars on funding programs for children and healthcare and so forth. Next slide, please. So immediately after that, we have a sense of where he's going to be going in FY17. But first, they needed to wrap up the 2017 budget, which was just wrapped up at the end of April. The budget, we hadn't finished the budget process from last year, and there were a number of things that needed to be addressed with, including drastic overspending by ICE. Thanks to a final push at the end of the Obama administration, where we saw record highs in detention beds and in apprehensions and in enforcement activities. So ICE overspent its budget, and we are left to pay for it now. So as part of the fiscal year 17 piece, Trump requested $3 billion to fund more ICE agents and CPD agents, to fund more detention beds, and to fund his border wall. Next slide, please. We made a very aggressive campaign where we were very clear that the immigration community would not accept for the FY17 budget any more boots, any more beds, and any more walls. We had a partial victory on this insofar as he only got half of what he requested. He requested $3 billion and 1.5. He got 1.5 billion. He got, including in that was actually $772 million for border security, which included dollars for border fencing. However, not for the brick and mortar kind of pouring of any concrete wall. And so it's the question about what is a fence and what is a wall, and I'm sure many of you have seen the Spicer images that he put up of the wall that they're building that actually wasn't, the fence that actually wasn't a fence at all, but a construction site on the border. But so we see this as kind of a half victory, and it's on one hand great symbolically that we denied Trump his wall in the last budget round. However, he did pay for when the detention beds moving back, and he did put this new money in for border security that's going to go for things like more surveillance cameras and technology and things like this. One of the things that was, the other kind of, the two good things that did come out of it were the end of the detention bed quota. We no longer sort of have the $34,000 detention bed number that had been kind of the quota that under the Obama administration, many Detention Watch Network and other advocates had always been saying, if we have 34,000 bed quota, we're going to fill 34,000 beds. Unfortunately, I think the Republicans are seeing this more as a floor rather than a ceiling for beds, and so they were happy to eliminate the quota from that end. But so in some ways that's a good thing, but we still have a new fight ahead of us in terms of detention beds. And they didn't get any new funding to hire new CBP and ICE agents. So that was where things were at with fiscal year 2017. Again, the Democrats, led by Schumer, Senator Schumer and others really declared victory, saying we didn't give him the wall, and we didn't give him any money to hire any new ICE agents or CBP agents, more boots on the ground. I think one of the things that's challenging here is that they're having actually issues even finding folks that will be willing to take, CBP and ICE positions. They actually have 2,000 positions that they actually can't fill. And one of the concerns that we've really seen is that they have talked about doing things like making the standards for agents lower so that more people pass the tests, and that includes eliminating or reducing the polygraph test. Clearly, it's very concerning that they wouldn't want to vet agents who are responsible for enforcing immigration law to ensure that they're not lying, although that might not be surprising these days. But so it's very important for us to keep pushing back to say we will not allow them to lower standards in order to fill positions at CBP or ICE. So next slide, please. So that was 17, but really the real fight lies ahead. President Trump will release his full budget, his less skinny budget on Tuesday, May 23rd. That's next Tuesday. We are anticipating devastating cuts to means-tested benefits, and we are definitely anticipating the border wall funding and increased funding for interior enforcement. The message that we're coming together with many other groups on is really going to be a two-part message. One is really pushing back against the cuts to crucial programs. And again, those cuts are both to fund the ramp up in the Department of Defense and immigration enforcement in the wall, and also to fund the tax cuts he wants to make. Also important to know that he needs to pass this budget before he can turn to tax reform, which is really where he wants to be focused right now. Our message that we will be putting out a big Twitter push on Tuesday is really, hands off, our programs to fund Trump's deportation machine, hands up basic living standards, hands off Medicaid, meals for seniors, Social Security, Pell Grants. These are all things that are on the chopping block that Trump wants to cut in order to pay for more boots, more beds, and a wall, in addition to tax cuts for the wealthy. So you can stay tuned. We are also expecting, we'll talk some other health legislation on Tuesday, so it will be a very busy day. there'll be a rally in DC around lunchtime that we'll send more information about with groups, intersectional messages talking about why we all oppose the cuts once we have more clarity on what is exactly in Trump's budget. The budget has to be passed by the end of September. So possibly it could be that they'll let the clock run all the way to the final end of September, until we finally get an agreement on this. But I just want to emphasize as a final note that it's really important that this be where folks and community groups really put their energy right now and get their voices heard. Democrats, oddly, and folks that are supportive of, in a nonpartisan way of immigrant rights issues, have a very unique leverage right now, despite what the electoral outcomes were last fall, because of the fact that Trump needs to get this budget passed. And so if we want to stop Trump's agenda, we have no way, at least until midterm elections, to try and pass anything congressionally through the legislature, but we can have the power of the purse in Congress to stop from funding his initiatives to tear apart communities and create a deportation machine that will do nothing but spread terror and fund that by cutting social programs. So we'll be in touch with more information, but we really need communities to be active, reaching out to their representatives in Congress to send that message that no boots, no beds, no wall, and no cuts.
Thank you, Jackie. Now I'm going to pass it over to Ben from Baji to talk about their Divest Invest campaign.
Hey everybody, this is Ben with the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. I'm very excited to be with you all and talk about invest, divest tactics that we can use on the ground. And the reason why we have employed an invest, divest approach is that we're not only looking at kind of the devastating attack on our communities, we also want to not just be on the defensive, but get on the offense and actually fight for the things our communities deserve and fight for the world we really want to be in. And so that's what when we look at, that's what our approach when we do an invest or divest approach, that we really want to envision a new world where our communities are able to live and be safe and be strong. And then along with that, I'm going to be kind of, reviewing kind of the recent transitions that we're dealing with, and then kind of look at local strategies that people are using to address that in a number of different ways. And so, as you all know, in the recent executive orders, there was a travel ban that was targeting Muslim communities and Muslim immigrants. But along with the executive orders, there was the expansion of who is criminal, who is considered a criminal immigrant. So not only were we looking at people who have been convicted of offenses, but also anybody who has done anything that could be chargeable, or anybody who's been arrested. And so this is a massive expansion of who is the target of deportation efforts. And then also there's an effort within the executive orders to criminalize people who are supporting undocumented immigrants in their stay and their survival within the United States. So attack on anybody who's seeing undocumented neighbors and family members as worthy of basic human decency. Next slide, please. And so just as Jackie has pointed out, we see a massive amount of resources being marshaled towards a national deportation machine that has been here for the last at least 50 years of kind of the modern immigration system. We've seen 10,000 new ICE agents being scheduled to be employed, 5,000 new Border Patrol agents, and so that budget fight is going on right now around that. And then all of this also includes increased military spending that Jackie talked about, with $54 billion being given to the Department of Defense. Now this is also corresponding with budget cuts for social programs, from HUD to education to basic things like even around a host of programs that many people have never been scheduled to rally fights around are being cut. So this shift of resources isn't the increase in kind of the cages and the prisons of our society corresponds to a massive cut in the social programs that our communities desperately need. Next slide, please. And so, I mean, this is just a quick summary of something that we saw coming in from February in the presidential proposal. So, as we said, as Jackie pointed out, there was an effort to add $3 billion. Previous slide, please. There was an effort to add $3 billion in the deportation machine and a $52 billion increase in the Department of Defense. But also along with that, there was a corresponding cut, almost 10 billion to education, 6 billion from HUD, over 50 programs and 3,200 jobs from the EPA scheduled to be cut, and also the Department of Justice being cut by $1 billion. And along with that, also eliminating a number of administrations that are directly responsible to supporting a number of efforts around climate change, around jobs, and community support, even public radio stations, any number of issues that we're seeing that of programs that are being cut to facilitate the expansion of the deportation machine that we're dealing with. Next slide, please. So I wanted to get into what people are doing locally, what tactics people are taking, because our perspective is that this is immigration and all the issues that we're dealing with are not just a federal issue, but they live locally, and it's locally where we can win significant battles, and also begin to draw lines in the sand about not only what we're about to defend, but also what we're trying to create, the world we want to live in for our communities that we definitely deserve. Next slide, please. So, I want to use the example of New York City for one. So, as early as 2014, before the current administration that got into power, we saw a massive expansion of the police force, where 1,300 new police officers were hired at a cost of around $200 million a year. And then what some of us estimated that this would become a $5 or $6 billion investment that New York City was making over the next 10 years to the NYPD. And this also corresponded with major cuts in social spending. And so housing, education, a number of things were being cut. And we saw the expansion of the police force as a direct attack on immigrants for a number of reasons. Policing being, criminal justice system being kind of the welcome mat into immigration enforcement. We saw already that this was not just an attack on vulnerable communities broadly, but it was uniquely dangerous for immigrants, as well as looking at the cut from funding across in a number of social support areas. And so what we saw was this was a foreshadowing of what would come on the federal level. The local battles reflected what is a national trend across the country, and that we see federally as more and more resources are marshaled toward punishment and things that are life-giving social programs are being cut. And many of our elected officials that may be against this administration rhetorically and policy aligned with them. Next slide, please.
Hey, Ben, are you still there? You still on? We can't hear you, so I'm not sure if maybe you're on mute.
Into the train and being arrested for that. So 30,000 people arrested every year for that. And this is particularly dangerous for immigrants because that's a deportable offense under immigration law. And so there was a campaign called SWIPEITFORWARD that was created around this to target this offense and to point out broken windows policing as an attack on communities, but also immigrants in particular. Now, as the invest divest strategy, this is particularly interesting because it cost the city around $60 million to enforce the arrest of 30,000 people who could not pay their fare. 92% of these people are people of color. And along with that, so this is a massive amount of policing targeting the most vulnerable communities. Now, this $60 million that's cost to facilitate these arrests, it would only cost $42 million to give every person who's arrested free access to the train year-round. So we were able to point out that just on a basic budgetary and fiscal level, that this is just egregious and fiscally irresponsible. But also we wanted folks in our communities to imagine a different world where transportation access and a right to transportation is guaranteed for everyone. And so that is what we're rallying people around, is that it's not just about the attack, but actually helping people vision and dream for what is possible and what they actually want for themselves. And so SWIPEITFORWARD is one example of a local tactic that addresses a local issue, that fights for immigrants, that helps to shift things locally, that is also in line with what is going on to reverse the national trend across the country around putting resources into deportation while cutting basic services. Next slide, please. So again, that's the review of what we want to discuss. I wanted just to leave you with some basic tools for you all to look at. We have a memo analyzing the recent executive orders that you all can look at, and we also, just like Jackie, kind of break down the recent budget, and you can see that in an article we wrote called "Follow the Money." And then if you want to get an insight into kind of the Swipe It Forward campaign and how you all can start to think about local strategies around invest, divest to shift things locally and also target things federally, we have an article on Swipe It Forward on our website as well. And then finally, if you wanted to get a sense of just the impact of the modern immigration system for the last 50 years, its impact on our communities, particularly Black immigrants, we have a report that we put out last year called The State of Black Immigrants, which you can find at stateofblackimmigrants.com. So thank you all for coming and here and taking time to hear us. We hope to kind of continue to build with many of you all and to join you locally in many cities across the country to address things, to fight for the needs of our communities.
All right, thank you, Ben. And before our next speaker, we'll take a few questions. So if anybody has a question, please type it into the chat box. And I wanted to ask both you, Ben and Jackie, obviously since local and federal budgets affect a wide range of groups, if you could talk a bit about who else has been involved in some of these fights and who do you think should be involved?
Can you repeat that one more time? There was a little trouble on my line.
Yeah, sure. Since budget issues affect the wide range of people, I was just wondering who has already been involved in terms of groups or sectors outside of immigrant rights and who you think should be involved in this fight.
In my opinion, I think that we've got to find a way when we're addressing budget issues to link our issues of immigrant rights to a range of other issues so that we bring in all of our communities. So, for example, the campaign I pointed out about Swipe It Forward that was addressing the budget, we understood that arrests for fare beating are deportable for immigrants. But we wanted to link that to issues of transportation access that all low-income working class New Yorkers need and have. And so we pointed out that these arrests of 30,000 people a year, it's actually much cheaper to give people access to the train year-round. And so we were able to link the issue of immigrant rights to the issue of transportation access, to also the issue of jobs, and also to the issue of kind of family unity and bringing communities together. So these are things that everyone is concerned with, and so I think people should keep in mind that as you address immigrant rights, understand that you can bring in other communities depending on how you structure your campaign, and also understand that the immigrants live three-dimensional lives. So deportation and detention isn't the only concern people have. People also have issues, just concerns about their jobs, their housing, their education. And so if you can find a way to craft a budget, invest, divest strategy around immigration, make sure to bring all these other issues in.
Yeah, I mean, just to echo that, the attack on immigrants is, as was just said, an attack on low-income communities and communities of color, and really just the attack that that Trump has on these programs is really, he wants to pay for this wall and for this mass deportation force on the backs of low-income communities, on the backs of families struggling. So he wants to take away people's health care, take away crucial life-saving programs, nutrition programs, education programs, to pay for this fear-mongering, campaign of xenophobia. And it's just, I think that no one, regardless of what your connection is to immigrant rights issues, should want their taxpayer dollars going to fund that, especially at a moment when so many people are so vulnerable and people need jobs. Why are we not building roads? Why are we building walls? And I think that that's really the message that has to be out there. So faith communities, anti-poverty minority groups, racial justice and economic justice organizations are all at the table as well.
All right, thank you. And one other question came in from a person who is in Maryland and works with a newly formed local community organization. This person wants to know how they can best be helpful on these issues.
Well, first and foremost is reaching out to members of Congress and plugging in and being clear that in Maryland and their community, they care about this issue and that they're watching their members of Congress. I think that that's really just very crucial, and that they will not be okay or stand aside, you know, as these budget cuts sort of move forward, and that, you know, they won't be intimidated by, you know, budget technicalities. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, not a penny more for enforcement and no cuts to programs, right? I think that a lot of the times people feel overwhelmed by the complexities of the federal budget, but it's actually not that complicated. At the end of the day, this is cutting programs for families, low-income families, and communities that need it most, and it's creating expenditures to terrorize communities at the border and also in the interior of the country. So that's really the message they need to be sending to their members of Congress.
Shimin, can you repeat that question again, please?
Yeah, sure. It's from a person in Maryland who's part of a newly created community group, and they want to know how best they can be helpful on these issues. Okay.
Yeah, I think much like Jackie said, I think building coalitions around what people actually want, not just what people are afraid of and fearful of. We want to build a movement that's courageous, not just fearful. So articulating that, you know, these resources that are putting towards deportation should be rerouted to the things that actually people in Maryland actually need. Are there issues? Do people need jobs? Do people need public transportation? Do people need housing? Those are the things that actually make for strong communities and safe communities. And so if you can make those links and bring people in, and even on the local level, begin that fight locally around the budget and the state budget and even the city budgets. If you can begin that fight, you can win and bring people together.
All right, so let's move on now to Matt, who is based in DC and is going to discuss healthcare legislation. Matt?
Thanks, Shumi. All right, thank you everybody for joining. Thanks for the fellow panelists for that great discussion of the budget. The budget, of course, is one area that greatly affects healthcare, but I am going to touch on a couple pieces of legislation that are being considered right now. So if we go to the next slide. We will start with the American Health Care Act. The American Health Care Act is the Obamacare replacement bill that that Speaker Ryan and the Republican and members of the Republican Party have put forward. You may have heard a couple months ago this bill seemed to have failed, but it was resurrected in the House, and on May 4th it was passed by just 4 votes. There were a couple of amendments that were put into the bill that allowed, the first of which allows state to opt out of certain ACA provisions, Obamacare provisions, which made it much worse. And then what kind of moved it over the finish line was that a fairly small amount of money for what are called high-risk pools were put into the bill. But I'm not going to get too much into the details of this bill other than to focus on kind of how this affects immigrants. The bill is really bad for all Americans, and immigrants are certainly no different. The biggest issue in the bill is a rollback for eligibility. Essentially, under Obamacare, new groups of immigrants were made eligible for affordable health coverage. Medicaid, since the mid-90s, has been a pretty limited program when it comes to immigrants. Only groups of qualified immigrants, most of whom have to wait 5 years for coverage, are eligible for that program. So that means that mostly people like refugees, asylees, and green card holders who have waited 5 years are able to enroll in Medicaid. However, under the Affordable Care Act, all lawfully present immigrants other than people who have DACA were made eligible for affordable coverage under the Obamacare healthcare.gov website or whatever is in one state immediately with no 5-year wait. So the American Health Care Act would go back to this much more restricted Medicaid standard. So a lot of people would lose their coverage, and they would join the nearly 24 million people who are expected to have their health care insurance removed by the in the first 10 years of this bill were it to go through. There are a few other areas where it also disproportionately affects immigrants. There are issues like cuts to Planned Parenthood and certain public health programs that many immigrants, including immigrants who are undocumented, are able to use to receive care when they need things like vaccines and such. And the ending of the Medicaid program as we know it, which is also in the bill, would just make it much harder on states to consider things like covering certain groups of undocumented folks using their own money because they would be so stretched for money. So it's a really bad bill for immigrants. And the question now is where we're going in the Senate now that this has passed the House. So if we go to the next bill, or the next slide. So what we have in the Senate is a group of all men now deciding where the Republican Party is going to be going. Some other Republicans are also working separately to try to make the bill even worse with bigger cuts to Medicaid. And then there are about a dozen senators who have met for some bipartisan talks. We don't really expect this piece to go anywhere. It seems like most of the movement is going to be among these Republicans you see here, as well as others in the party. There's also many members of the Senate who are thinking about how they can insert themselves into this discussion. So although these are the leaders in this effort, there's certainly a lot of opportunity to reach out to one's own representatives. We could go to the next slide. So there's a lot of reasons why this might be as hard or harder in the Senate to get through, which is what Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, recently said. So as you see here, I've listed a couple of ways that this might be difficult. For one, the Republican Party is not particularly aligned on how to go forward. There's a few different points of disagreement among conservatives, among moderates, and so there's just similar splinters to what happened in the House that's also going to happen in the Senate. There's a lot of ways, and it gets pretty complicated, but just to say that there's a lot of ways that the bill that made it through the House would be unable to pass through the Senate, because the Senate has particular rules on what can be in this bill, because Republicans want to pass it with 50 votes and 51 votes instead of 60 votes. So that means it has to follow certain rules, and it's possible that the bill as written in the House won't be able to make it through the Senate without drastic changes. Unlike the House, the Senate will also have to have a score from the Congressional Budget Office of the updated bill in order to go through. So what really this means is that there's a lot of opportunity to be involved. This is not, unlike when the House kind of reconvened to pass this through very quickly, there is going to be some time, maybe not a whole lot of time, but certainly some time for discussions to go through. We, for instance, expect the CBO score to come out next week, at which point things will really start to speed up, but there's certainly time. If I can get the next slide, thank you. So what this means is that folks, if they want to, can get involved in their communities in trying to push back on changes that will be harmful to immigrants. I think the most important thing that I can think of is to make sure that folks are alerting their communities about this danger in this bill, so that folks are prepared, so that there aren't surprises, so that if you have folks who may feel very passionate about this issue, that they're aware and can engage in their own personal advocacy should this be something that they want to spend their time on. Second is to connect with allies and align advocacy to align advocacy and make sure the immigrant perspective is represented. In many states, there are coalitions being built, folks organizing around even at small levels to think about, how to push back on their representatives and whatnot. And, the areas that affect immigrants are certainly, along with many other harmful effects of this bill. But it may be helpful to ensure that, immigrant voices are part of that discussion. Third, I would say, connect with allies in Congress, state houses, and local governments. If you have representatives who are friendly and who really care about their community, immigrant communities, it may be a good time to let them know that this is important, to let them know that you want to see any form of healthcare reform that goes through Congress be protecting of immigrant households just the same as anybody else. And finally, I would say for those who want to engage, now it continues to be the time to resist, be it social media, be it town halls, be it however you choose to advocate. Now would be an important time to do so. Next slide, please. And finally, I just wanted to bring up one more piece of legislation, not because I think this legislation is going to become law, but because it's possible that there will be a hearing soon in the coming weeks in the House Ways and Means Committee, and it will be a hearing in which there will probably be a lot of really false and a lot of really negative things said about immigrants and their access to health programs. This was introduced by Representative Barletta, who is no friend of immigrants, and he did so kind of in order to agree to vote for the American Health Care Act. And he got a promise that this bill would get a vote. It requires a Social Security number to get Obamacare tax credits. Currently, under law, a Social Security number is not a requirement. What matters is whether somebody is lawfully present. That continues to be what the eligibility standard will be. This will just add an unnecessary burden on immigrants and would effectively end up preventing many eligible immigrants from actually being able to enroll for the programs in which they're eligible, or for at least to get tax credits to make it affordable. The justification that Barletta uses is this argument about fraud and about cost, and so there's going to be a lot of incorrect things said in this hearing should it be held. It's important to note that all of these things that they're going to say, they're going to quote $750 million in tax credits that were given to undocumented immigrants, all results from a pretty shoddy report by a Senate committee that kind of made up their own numbers and did some guesswork to arrive at it, assuming that every single person that lost their coverage due to an inability to verify their immigration status must have been ineligible. When in reality, we know that the issue is that this process is very difficult, and many eligible people have actually been cut off of coverage. So it's really taking people who have been harmed by programs that don't work and then saying that they're receiving things for which they shouldn't be receiving, which just isn't true. And it's really just a way to attack the ACA and to make immigrants a scapegoat. So, should this hearing be held, we at NILC will be working to correct the errors, working to get the correct information out, and we do invite you to follow our social media and help uplift the correct information in your community. And that's about all that I have.
All right, thank you, Matt. And as a reminder, please keep typing in your questions in the chat box. So now we're going to have Nico from NILC talk about some of our litigation updates.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about two areas that were involved in litigation. First, I'm going to give some updates on our challenges to the Muslim ban cases, and after that, I'm going to address some issues related to DACA, the federal government targeting of DACA recipients. So first, just to remember where we are with regards to the Muslim and refugee ban that was brought about by President Trump pursuant to his executive orders, that after getting the first executive order enjoined, President Trump in March signed a second executive order doing, in his words, and I'm paraphrasing here, essentially the same thing. So NILC, along with a number of other organizations throughout the country, brought in various courts, brought multiple challenges to this second executive order. And there, in district court in Maryland, we got an injunction as to the travel ban portion of the second executive order, which barred nationals from 6 countries, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen, from obtaining visas for 90 days. Additionally, the state of Hawaii sued the Trump administration and was able to get an injunction both to this travel ban portion, but also to the refugee provisions of the second executive order, which would have put a halt on refugee programs for 120 days and would have slashed refugee admissions for the current fiscal year from 110,000 to 50,000. Next slide, please. So after these 2 injunctions were put in place, courts throughout the country who had also been challenging it, a lot of that litigation was stayed, or at least to the extent that that litigation also sought the kind of preliminary injunctions we got in the Maryland IRAP case and Hawaii got in its case, were temporarily put on hold. But the federal government appealed these decisions in Hawaii and in our case in IRAP v. Trump, and in just this week and last week, those hearings were held in the 4th Circuit for our Maryland IRAP case, and in the 9th Circuit in the Hawaii v. Trump case. So I'll start with the hearing in IRAP v. Trump, just as an update for folks, and so if folks aren't aware of the appellate process. So after, usually in a district court where one judge issues a ruling, parties have an opportunity to appeal it to the appellate court that handles appeals from that geographical region. For Maryland, it's the 4th Circuit. And the way that, and in Hawaii, it's the 9th Circuit. The way that these are normally held is that instead of just one judge looking at it, they have 3 appellate judges in general looking at it. But there's another layer on top of that, which is called en banc review, where they have often an even bigger panel of judges from the same appellate circuit look at it and review the 3-judge panel. In very, very rare instances, the appellate courts will skip that 3-judge panel and move to automatically the en banc review. And that's what happened in our IRAP v. Trump case. There, 13 judges heard our appeal in that case, and our co-counsel from the ACLU, Omar Jadwat, argued for our plaintiffs, the International Refugee Assistance Project, HIAS, which is another refugee assistance organization, as well as MASA, which is a Muslim scholars organization. Very difficult questions were asked to both sides in this hearing. We were aware that there were some judges that were hostile to our position, but it did seem that some of them, maybe even a majority of them, agreed with our position. We're not going to know any of that yet, but we did see some encouraging signs based on the questions that we saw. While we can never know for sure, based on questions, how judges will rule, we're at least cautiously optimistic there. And that appeal was heard on May 8th. 1 week later, in the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals in Hawaii v. Trump, a 3-judge panel there heard the appeal in the Hawaii case. There, once again, it was much of the same. We believe that there was difficult questions for both sides, but we also are very optimistic that some of the questions indicate that the judges hopefully are likely to keep the injunction in place. So that all of this goes to the next question many people might have, which is, how long will it take for us to get an answer on these cases? And the really, really short answer is that we don't know at this point how long that it will take. We think that the courts may be inclined to rule quickly here, but we can't be sure. There's no deadline by which they are officially required to issue a ruling, but we do know that both of these pieces of litigation, the appeal was heard on a very quick timeline. And so that may also indicate the judges are looking to rule relatively quickly on these appeals. I mentioned that there were a number of other cases going on throughout the country. One notable one that I want to mention is a case that's being heard in the district court in the District of Columbia. The case is PARS Equality Center v. Trump, and it's combined with another case, Universal Muslim Association of America v. Trump. Once again, these cases are challenging the president's executive order. And there, while the district court judge said, much like other district court judges have said, that they're not going to rule on any further injunctions because the sections 2 and 6, the travel ban and the refugee provisions, have already been enjoined, it did indicate that it was inclined to agree that, once again, the plaintiffs in those cases were likely to show that the travel ban and the refugee provisions were illegal and outside of the president's power. It wasn't an extensive ruling, but at least gives us indications that even if, for some technical reasons, the appeals in the IRAP and Hawaii cases were to go away for some reason, and I'm not saying they will, there are other courts throughout the nation that are looking hard at this case and agreeing that the plaintiffs are likely to show that the executive orders were in fact illegal. Such is my quick update on the Muslim ban litigation. Oh, one more thing. The next step for the IRAP and Hawaii litigation very well could be the Supreme Court. We don't, once again, just as though we don't know the timeline for the decision, we don't know whether or not an appeal to the Supreme Court will be necessary, on what timeline it might occur at this time. But we'll continue to keep folks updated as we get more information. And so with that, I'd like to go to the next slide, please. So now I'd like to transition to discuss two of our cases that we're also litigating here at NILC that are seeking, that are bringing legal actions to protect the rights of DACA recipients. And so next slide, please. Thank you. So the first one that I want to highlight is MONTES versus CBP. So here, this is a case involving a DACA recipient who was deported to Mexico, despite the fact that his DACA status was valid at the time of his deportation. So what we know is that in mid-February, Juan Manuel Montes was physically deported despite having permission to live and work in the U.S. under DACA. Border Patrol and DHS have contested what we have learned from Mr. Montes about this deportation and have not been forthcoming with how and why he was deported. This is really a pattern that we've seen with the Border Patrol and DHS in general, in terms of a failure to provide information and accountability about how and they're conducting enforcement actions and whether they're complying with what should be legal protections for individuals, including individuals who have DACA. So given this inability to get information about exactly what happened to Mr. Montes, we have filed a federal lawsuit demanding the federal government turn over information about his deportation. So here, in order to take any kind of next steps to protect or enforce Mr. Montes' legal rights, we have sought what is called a Freedom of Information Act request. That is to force the federal government to provide us with information that details exactly what actions they took against Mr. Montes, how they deported him, and what their justification was. So after we filed this FOIA, DHS issued a series of contradictory statements about how and why Mr. Montes was deported that are internally inconsistent. They seem to have retracted one statement, issued another. Once again, just highlighting the need to get the information so that we can not only shine light on DHS's practices, but so we can enforce Mr. Montes' rights. So with that, I'd like to turn to another case that we're litigating to protect the rights of DACA recipients. In this case is VARGAS v. Kelly. So on March 7th, NILC and other civil rights groups brought a legal action to stop the deportation of Daniela Vargas. Daniela was a DACA recipient who had been detained by immigration agents immediately after she had spoken at a March 1st press conference that was protesting recent ICE raids in Mississippi. So on the way from speaking at this event, driving off, Ms. Vargas was stopped by federal immigration officials and detained. Daniela had, Ms. Vargas had been there, so at this rally, to speak about her hopes that her and other Dreamers could remain in and contribute to this country, and to speak about the rights that these individuals should have to continue to be here and to contest the current enforcement actions. After NILC and these other groups brought an action that was called a habeas action, the federal government released Daniela, but NILC continues to litigate this case to ensure her rights are protected. We're concerned that this case is part of a growing concern that we have, that ICE may attempt to try to retaliate against individuals, whether they be, regardless of their immigration status, regardless of whether they have DACA, regardless of whether they're undocumented, who we're concerned that federal immigration officials might seek to retaliate against these individuals for their advocacy. And so NILC is going to continue to work with other groups, both on the policy grounds, but also in terms of litigation, to ensure that individuals have their rights protected, both to speak out about issues that are affecting them, but also to ensure that they're, to the extent that they have DACA or other protections, that those rights are respected by federal immigration officials. And so with that, I'd like to conclude the presentation with regards to some of our cases that we're litigating here in NILC right now.
All right, thank you, Nico. So we have some minutes remaining, so we can take some questions. I have one for you, Matt, which is there any update on the leaked public charge executive order?
Sure. Thanks, Shumi. We have not heard any additional information about the leaked public charge memo that came out at the end of January. Vox News published something, for those who haven't seen this, that would drastically expand the public charge analysis that currently takes place. It's important to know that nothing in law has changed. So everything remains the same as it has been. We're still following the 1999 field guidance. We do encourage folks to continue discussing this issue with their community if folks have concerns. And please email us at publiccharge, one word, at nilc.org if you would like to help us track harm that's created by people being afraid of using programs. We also, may be using that for, all sorts of advocacy that we may be engaged in. And finally, one thing I would say, I think this may have been mentioned on a previous call, but we do have a document on our website, on our public charge website about how to discuss this issue with community members who may be concerned.
Great, thank you. And then a question about the litigation. How can people participate publicly? How can they support Mr. Montes and Ms. Vargas? And is there anything else people can be doing to show their opposition to the Muslim and refugee ban?
Well, as folks may remember, public opposition to the Muslim ban was really one of the driving factors that I think really influenced courts to understand the seriousness of this issue and understand how this was affecting individuals, not only civil rights and civil liberties, but basic kind of human dignity to be with their families, their loved ones, and their community. As we saw immediately after the first ban was announced and individuals arriving that night begun to be detained at airports throughout the country, it was massive public outcry about this, including tremendous protests at airports throughout the country, volunteers from the legal community and other places arriving to ensure that families had legal representation for anyone who was detained, and even protests outside of the courthouses in some of the first cases challenging this ban really sent the message not only to the federal government but also to the courts who had to look at the legal issues surrounding these executive orders that this was an issue of the utmost importance to the American public, and one which cut against our core values of inclusion and freedom from discrimination. And so I think that the public reaction to the Muslim ban cases really stands as one of the clearest examples of how individuals can be involved to shape the fight back against these discriminatory actions of the Trump administration. Going forward, we need to continue to show that that things like the executive orders, things like extreme vetting and any potential congressional changes in Congress to immigration laws cannot allow for these kind of discriminatory actions to be taken. So, like many other things, holding representatives accountable, getting them to not back any efforts that would increase discriminatory practices against individuals, whether they be based on national origin or whether they be based on religion, should be unacceptable. Now, just a little insight from in the courts. I think the courts really understand in there that the excuses the federal government is giving that this is based on national security are really not the primary motivations behind these executive actions. And I think that it's the continued insistence by the members of the public that these actions be viewed not as a national security issue, but rather as an impermissible Muslim ban, have been central to allow us to maintain that proper view of these issues before the court. So things like tweeting, social media engagement, speaking to your representatives, I think remain essential to frame these issues in a way that the courts understand their real impact on our communities. So that, at least with regards to the Muslim ban, I think that it provides a model for how we can look at it with regards to many of the ways that we'll contest the way that the Trump administration tries to reframe its discriminatory actions.
Thank you. So we are at time, so I wanted to thank all the speakers for your presentations. And for the attendees, we will send you the PowerPoint and a link to the recording tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. And please do continue to follow NILC on our Facebook page as well as on Twitter to receive updates on issues that are affecting low-income immigrants and other communities of color. Our Twitter handle is NILC_org, and we hope that you will join us in the future for more webinars to talk about emerging immigrant rights issues. Thank you.